Hello, I'm Isabel Oakeshott and this is the Westminster Report. Well, lots to talk about today. We'll start off with Rupert Lowe's big offer to reform that olive branch that he's extended to Nigel Farage. What does it mean? Is he serious? Could it work? Then we'll talk about the small boats, so-called small boats. They're getting bigger, and Andy Burnham has already presided over 2,000 extra illegal immigrants coming across the channel, and more will be coming over in the next few days. So we'll discuss that. Is it an invasion? And what about sending in the Navy? That's what Nigel Farage thinks we should be doing. A lot of people would agree with him, and yet no government has ever done this. Why not? And finally, we might just touch on what's been going on with Morocco and Spain and those extraordinary scenes in the last few days of all those thousands of young men breaching a border fence. And I'm going to be joined by Christian Mitchell of Talk, and together we'll go through these top stories today.
Just on this reform, restore olive branch, I guess, from Rupert Lowe. Why now?
Well, I think Rupert Lowe is in some difficulty. The received wisdom is that Rupert Lowe is making this offer. And by the way, I think it's a phony offer, but we'll come to that. Because he's in a position of strength and he smells blood with reform. It's no secret that reform has had a really bumpy time these last few weeks, starting with the revelation about the £5 million that Nigel Farage received from Christopher Harborne, and then going through a bunch of other financial related controversies. So reform's having a bit of a sticky time at the moment, and people have commented in the last 12 or 24 hours since Rupert Lowe's offer came out that he's doing this because he thinks reform is in a vulnerable position. I would actually look at it rather a different way and wonder about what position Rupert Lowe himself is in. Now, I don't want to be uncharitable here. It's really, really difficult to build a party out of nothing. I know this, I've lived it. You know, my partner Richard Tice was a leader of reform at the time when it was growing from nothing. It's a really hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of guts to do it. And I admire anyone that thinks they'll give it a go. And I'll be honest, he's gone further than I actually thought he would. But I think what's happening here is he's bumping up against some cold, hard realities. And I think that there are 2 or 3 realities for him. Number one is the operational challenge of standing a large number of candidates periodically in local elections pretty much every year. You know, this is cyclical. And it's really, really hard to find good people who are prepared to run in local elections. And he will be very mindful of next year's elections. He has to come up with a bunch of candidates. And that is a huge operational challenge, not least because, as Reform knows from the scars on its back, you've also got to vet these people. And I don't think it's particularly unfair to say that there's some pretty colourful characters around Restore. One of the reasons that Reform's leadership has not been too upset about Rupert Lowe's operation is because he's actually taking some of the kind of characters that we in Reform, and I say we because I'm very open about the fact my partner is deputy leader, we wouldn't want those characters. And it's really difficult when you're running any political party, because we can't immediately control who your supporters are. So he's got to find candidates, and that is a real headache. And I think he'll be very mindful of how hard that is. If he wants to be a national operation, he's got to field candidates everywhere. And that is no mean feat. I also think he's bumping up potentially against a money problem. Now, there's been this sort of fallacy about Elon Musk supporting Rupert Lowe's outfit, and Elon Musk has certainly made those noises, but has Rupert and Restore declared any big donations from Elon Musk? I don't think so. So where's the money for Rupert and his party? Political parties all have this problem. It's a nightmare raising money. And especially if you're a new party and people are yet to believe that you could actually make it the whole way. And it's also a matter of record that he's been supported financially by a number of people with links to the Tories. Now, I wonder whether he didn't just do a little bit too well in that Manchester mayoral election last week, and the Tory result was terrible. And I wonder whether some of those that have been supporting Rupert Lowe and perhaps doing some deals with him quietly behind the scenes, I wonder whether they think they might have created a bit of a monster, and they are now pulling the rug from under him. So I don't think this is Rupert Lowe speaking from a position of strength. I'm not saying that Reform is in its best shape right now either, but I think this is him speaking actually from a position of weakness.
Were you surprised that Nigel Farage seemed to respond to the olive branch from Rupert Lowe, where he tweeted quite a long statement where he said, Reform do need to build a broad coalition?
Well, I'm really glad that he responded in that way, because I don't think that insulting Rupert Lowe, and I've probably been a bit rude about him in the past, I'm not sure that is the way ahead here, because a lot of people that are minded to vote for Reform are also flirting with the idea of backing Rupert Lowe. And Reform has definitely lost people to Rupert Lowe's movement. Now, they might not be the people that we want, but there's a numbers game here, and there are some realities. And I don't think that whilst Nigel has no time for Rupert Lowe personally, what Nigel does have time for is many of the good, wholehearted people that support Rupert Lowe for sound reasons. And as Rupert said, there's an awful lot we can agree on. I mean, I listened to his video. I didn't like the background music. I mean, that was fromage. Seriously, it's not chocolate.
It seemed like he had someone playing the piano in the living room.
I mean, what was that all about? If I'd been advising him, I'd have said, just, you don't need the music. Actually, it was beautifully set up. He looked nice in his blue shirt. He's got that gravelly voice. I think that was enough. We didn't need the tinkling piano in the background. You sort of slightly expected it to build up to some kind of orchestral crescendo. So I don't think we needed that. But I listened to it and I thought, do you know what? I actually agree with probably 3 out of 5 or 6 of the things that you're saying here. I'm totally with him, as are, I think, 100% of Reform supporters on the need for very large-scale, probably mass deportation of illegal immigrants. I'm with him on the need to reassert our Christian culture, the foundations of our Christian heritage in a way, and the need to actually push back against aspects of radical Islam that have no place in the UK. I mean, we talked a lot last week about this extraordinary story of the woman in a niqab who was given a Westminster, Good British Citizen Award for, quote, empowering women whilst wearing a niqab in Britain. To me, that just is completely contradictory, and there's no place for that, even though, pay tribute to her doing the great work she's doing. I'm afraid the niqab in the UK kind of kills that one for me. And I know that's something that Rupert Lowe feels strongly about, and Reform has got some positions on as well. So there's a lot to agree on there, but he also knows full well that Nigel, first of all, is never going to do a deal with him, because the two of them cannot work together. Why? Egos. And I'm talking about Rupert Lowe's ego here. He is not capable of working with many people. Bluntly, sorry, that's the truth. That is the experience of his fellow Reform MPs. And, there are 1 or 2 of them, well, all of them are quite reasonable people. Certainly my partner Richard has worked with all sorts of characters in the past, difficult and challenging personalities. And, he's very clear he cannot work with Rupert Lowe. Lee Anderson, Nigel Farage said, I think this, sometime in the fairly recent past, that Lee Anderson said he couldn't work with him either. So he's a very difficult character. I think he's very talented. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but he is very difficult to work with. It's a non-starter. When you look at in recent modern political history about parties that have come together and worked successfully, I'll keep returning to the coalition under David Cameron and Nick Clegg, 2010 to 2015. They were really quite alike as personalities. They're both super reasonable, quite easygoing, very good managers of people. All politicians have egos, let's be honest. And I'm not saying David Cameron's ego was anything other than pretty sizable, but he didn't let it get in the way of pragmatism and what was right for the country. And I'm no fan of David Cameron, please don't get me wrong, but those two, you could see how they would work well together, and work well together they did. Now, the political consequences for both of them ended up being pretty catastrophic. But, Nick Clegg's still sitting pretty. I don't know about David Cameron. But you can't see that working. And likewise, by the way, for Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch, that is never going to work. So if there were to be a pact between Reform and the Tories, it could not be under these two characters. That is just not going to happen. They appear to actually heartily dislike each other. I don't think there's any particularly personal history there. It's almost just when you just don't click with somebody. That seems to be what is going on there. Whereas with Nigel and Rupert, that is properly personal. I know we had Zia Yusuf on Talk today, and he's also got pretty bitter personal history with Rupert, and he was being very diplomatic, but I can't see how that would work either.
Does Nigel need Rupert Lowe more than Rupert Lowe needs Nigel, do you think? Absolutely
not. What Nigel needs now, and what everybody who supports Reform needs now, is for Reform to rediscover its mojo. It's difficult for Nigel at the moment because he's doing this by-election. I was about to say fighting this by-election, and then I thought, well, is he fighting it? And everyone's going to say, well, it's just against a bin, blah, blah. There's actually a bunch of other candidates there, and whilst I've no doubt that he could just do the minimum in Clacton, that's not who he is. He loves elections, and he's giving this his all, which is the most respectful thing to do to the voters of Clacton. So in a sense, he's been pretty diverted by that. That's of his own making. There's been a lot of debate about whether it was a strategic act of genius, a masterstroke, or was it a blunder to have triggered that by-election. And I actually think it was the best and probably the only thing that he could do at the time. People forget how much pressure Reform was under, how much pressure he was under. It just was remorseless. 5 million, 5 million, 5 million. It's all anyone was talking about. Whenever he went on the media, he couldn't do any press conferences, and Reform's very good at this stuff. It does, likes to have set the agenda by having press conferences. They're constantly hijacked by the 5 million. So he needed to find a way to try to move that on. And this was the way of doing it. Now, whether or not it will ultimately work, I'm sure he's going to win, and he's going to really win well. I'm also sure we're probably going to have to put up a list of 15 other candidates. There are other candidates available. But if he does win and is returned as an MP, does that draw a line under the 5 million questions? I don't think it will totally go away, but at least he can say, look, I've put this to the people that sent me to Westminster in the first place. And you know what? They don't actually care.
Do you think, actually, Nigel standing in Clacton was possibly, and he talked about this in his statement, a possible route out of politics, because he has admitted that, he thought about throwing in the towel a couple of times?
I mean, I think we all have our moments of thinking about throwing in the towel. I mean, you know, in any job, how many of us, you know, are constantly loving every aspect, apart from on talk, of course, we love our jobs. But look, everyone, politics is really brutal. My God, it's brutal. You know, you wonder who's your friends, who's stabbing you in the back, what's being plotted, and by the way, what the hell is the upside for most of them? You know, I'm talking about MPs here, the amount of grief they get, you know, and being really serious for a minute, it's not just the amount of grief and how thankless it is most of the time, and how everybody seems to be out to impugn your motives and say, well, you're only doing this because it will somehow make you richer. Far from the case. You know, most of them, certainly in reform, and there's only a handful of MPs, most of them could be earning a multiple of what they're earning as MPs. They're doing it for the good of the country. So you've got all that going on. Well, let's also not forget that one of Reform's people was murdered a few weeks ago, actually murdered. You know, this is the world of politics in the UK. It's horrible. Honestly, it's horrible. So if Nigel has had moments of thinking, you know what, I'm not actually sure this is worth it. You know, I'm just getting battered around all day, every day on the media. I'm not safe anywhere I go. And now Anne Widdecombe has actually been killed in her own home. Do you know what? You know, I just have to say, on a human level, which person wouldn't have a moment of thinking, maybe I might as well do something else? But he has not given any indication of that to other senior figures in Reform. You know, he is tough. Whatever he's thinking privately, I think there's a real steely determination there. There are 3 years to go, though. I just hope that he can keep the faith.
So you think he will walk Clacton?
I don't want to use the word walk. That's so cocky. You know, I think he'll do very well. I think the people there absolutely love him. They believe in him. And most of all, they are desperate about the state of our country. You know, I am daily shocked by the state of our country, but I'm also encouraged by the wonders that I see. And I'm sitting here today on the Isle of Wight. Out of my window, I see gorgeous beach and blue sea. The sun's shining. It's the best of the English seaside. You know, when I'm in London, I'm looking out on the Houses of Parliament and just thinking, my God, our country is so beautiful. It's incredible. That's what keeps me going as these small boats keep coming across the channel, and as I see our city centres, you know, degenerating amid mass uncontrolled immigration, welfare dependency, and low-level crime that has been just normalised. You know, I did a piece for Talk last week, seems like a lifetime ago, but I think it was early last week on Jeremy Kyle's show, about what's going on in the centre of Manchester. And my colleague Christian Drogan, who's actually from that area, just took a wander around the centre of Manchester on a Tuesday evening and comes across a girl fight. You know, 2 or 3 girls who can't have been older than 14 just setting about each other on the pavement in the middle of town outside Nando's. Everyone was just walking past. Like, this is shrug normal in modern Britain. Teenage girls knocking lumps out of each other. And when Christian intervened, because that's the kind of person he is, he can't walk on by, there was a kind of attitude of surprised indignation from some of the other teenagers that were loitering around, as if to say, well, what do you mean you're getting involved in this little local drama that's just taking place on the pavement outside Nando's? No grown-ups do that, do they? You know, what has become of our society that this is where we're at? All of that is super depressing. And where did I start with this? Well, it was about why people in Clacton are throwing their weight, I believe, behind Nigel. It's because we can't go on like this. We can't go on like this. We've tried Labour, we've tried the Tories again and again and again and again. They've let this country down. And yes, there's now Restore, totally unready for any form of government. Of course, they are, got one person in Parliament. Reform has only got a handful as well, but has now the infrastructure and the leadership and the credibility.
One other story to touch on, We got front page of the Sun today. The French are billing us £8,000 for every migrant they stop. Now, we hear a lot of figures about the migrant crisis. This is yet another one. We've had all the Chris Philp footage on the beaches of northern France. What do you make of this latest figure?
I have so much to say on this, Christian. We should do a whole other episode on this. Christian Drogan, who spent 2 weeks living in the migrant camps in Dunkirk, is probably knows more about the true nature of what is going on with the people smuggling racket than anyone except maybe our intelligence services, and even they, I don't think, have done anything like what he's done. And I'm going to have a lot more to be saying about this in the next couple of weeks. But the truth is, the French can stop the boats, and they do stop the boats, but only when it suits them. Now, if they can stop the boats when it suits them, why can't they stop the boats all the time? They can stop the departures ever happening. It isn't that difficult. They've demonstrated it isn't that difficult. What do? You just pop the boats. These are inflatables. They're not really very difficult to deactivate. The truth is they're not incentivized to do that. They will do it symbolically, periodically, just to show that they are, quote, doing something. The same people that were in boats that were popped, that didn't manage to make a launch, will simply be on another launch, some days later. So this is just tokenism. And meanwhile, we continue, thanks to the Home Office, the British taxpayers continuing to pay hundreds of millions of pounds to the French. This is outrageous. If I were in charge, if it were me in the Home Office or me in Number 10, I would be demanding all our money back, and I would be suing them for that, and I would also be launching a trade war. And in that way, you are going to exert the leverage on the French, make it hurt for them, because it sure as hell hurts for the British people to be accommodating that.
And you got Reform also pledging to put the Royal Navy in the Channel. What physically can the Royal Navy do if they're all lined up in the English Channel?
Well, turn them back. The Royal Navy, I'm not going to now act as if I'm a naval commander, but I don't really think this is particularly complicated. The Navy or our Marines simply need to be at the midway point, and they obviously can't probably make an incursion into French waters, but they just need to be at the midway point where at this juncture, the British taxpayer is providing a pickup service to bring migrants to the UK. What an absolute nonsense that is. And just push them back. I mean, turning back boats, people act as if this is some kind of astonishingly radical and dangerous thing to do. It isn't. Look at what happened in Australia under Tony Abbott, then Prime Minister, dealing with a similar situation. He had a policy of turning back boats, illegal immigrants arriving on the shores of Australia. It was very controversial, but guess what? After a few days, it worked. They just stopped coming. There's no point if you know you're going to be turned back. And Reform has got to do this. They've not just got to say they're going to do it, they have to do it. If Reform is to get into government, they will have to do this basically from day one. And if boats are routinely turned back, then they will stop coming. It's just obvious. And that's what I think needs to happen. But in the meantime, the French could do so much more. The whole system of thousands of illegals coming our way relies on French public transport that these illegal immigrants use to get from one boat point to another, from different launch points. They don't pay anything on the trains and buses. They just skip the fares, and the French authorities turn a blind eye. Well, look, you could actually disable this whole thing overnight if the French stopped forcing their own taxpayers to subsidise free transport for a load of illegal immigrants around northern France. It would make life a whole lot more difficult. What are the people smugglers going to do? Lay on minibuses? I don't know. Maybe they will.
Reform like to use the word invasion, not just about the sort of the recent scenes from Morocco, but actually from the beaches of northern France. Labour are very hesitant to use the word invasion about the situation in the English Channel. What word would you use?
I'd use two words: national emergency, and I'd use another one: security, national security crisis. I don't know what's wrong with Labour trying to pretend that softer language will make us all feel a bit better about the reality of this. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's primarily young men that are coming over here, not with women and children, because it's a very, very physical thing to do to get on these boats. It's really tough to actually wade out into the water, and if the boats come in too soon, as we saw last week, again a story I did with JK, they get beached, they actually get stuck. So you've got to swim, stagger, wade out there with your belongings. The last thing you want at that point is some toddler on your shoulders. It's really, really physical. And that's just the getting on the boat bit. What people don't see is the weeks of walking from different points, different launch points to another. There's a reason that they are footsore, when you see them in the camps, because they walk massive amount. It's physical, making this journey. And we only see them in northern France towards the end point. These people, they started their journey in all sorts of different other points in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East, wherever it may be. So what we're getting is boatloads of young men. And when those young men arrive in the UK, as we all know, under the current system, they are not detained for very long, no more than a few hours, I think, before they're put in accommodation from which they can roam free. And young men, quite understandably, are not that up for sitting around doing absolutely zero, as this government seems to imagine is realistic, for 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years, while their asylum cases are assessed. So of course, what do? The devil makes work for idle hands. They go and work on the black market, or they get up to serious forms of no good. So yes, it's an invasion. I think Iranian state sources confirmed only last week that some of their operatives are coming our way. We know this has happened before. There have been terror plots linked to Iranians that have come over on the small boats. It's mad. When you think about it, it's completely insane. It's not like Britain doesn't have any enemies. It's not like there aren't nutter rogue states out there, whether it's Putin's people, or whether it's the Iranians, or any number of other radicals that might be thinking of doing the UK harm. It's really easy for them to send their operatives over, isn't it? Just get on a boat and in you come, and you get put up in accommodation in the heart of communities from where you can plot terrible, terrible things. I can't think of any serious country, and there are plenty of not very serious countries in Western Europe, that would carry on doing this. This is absolutely insane. It's completely insane. I often think, because I live in the Middle East much of the time, I just imagine the idea of boatloads of people rocking up on the shores of the United Arab Emirates, where I live, going, hey, I've got a bit of a difficult life in another country. Do you mind if I just come in and could you please provide me with everything? And I'm not going to tell you who I am and what I'm up to, but I expect to stay here indefinitely. You would just be imprisoned instantly and deported forthwith. That's how serious countries protect their borders, protect their own people, protect their national security. It beggars belief that we've got to where we are.
But surely you were impressed to see Andy Burnham down on the White Cliffs of Dover?
Andy, I know it's tough for you to go south. We all know that you prefer to be up north. But my friend, let Christian Drogan, who knows about this stuff, give you a little guided tour of what's actually happening in northern France. How about you spend the night in a migrant camp in Calais or Dover? How about you listen to the AK-47s going off? How about you stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the women and children that are trying to make it over, and you tell the nation then that it is a humane thing? Because that's language that your supporters, Andy Burnham, will understand. Are you going to tell Labour voters that it is humane to encourage, to aid, to abet, to allow women and children to risk their lives in this way? This is an absolutely grotesque people smuggling trade. Women are dying. Women are dying on or off these boats. Others are dying too. We've seen images over the weekend, not actually from the channel, I think from the Morocco-Spain situation. This is horrible, this stuff. So if you don't buy into the national security argument, and I don't see how any sane person could find that difficult to understand, look at it on a humanitarian way. This is not the way to deal with what is a sort of global crisis. You know, allowing this to continue going on, I would say, is to have blood on your hands. Thank you very much for listening and watching today. I'd love to know what you think of the conversation. There's a lot of controversial issues that we covered in a very short space of time. So do leave your comments and subscribe to the channel to see more interviews like this.